She doesn't know that the janitor mopping her operating room floor is actually the brilliant neurosurgeon who saved her life 6 years ago. And now, he needs her to save his daughter's life. Dr. Aurora Gray's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee at 2:09 a.m. in Presbyterian Hospital's cardiac wing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty corridors. She had just finished a 12-hour surgery on a 6-year-old boy whose heart had been failing since birth. Another life saved. Another night she couldn't sleep. The elevator doors opened with their familiar ding, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. She needed to go home, shower, and try to forget the sound of the heart monitor flatlining twice during the operation. But as the elevator lurched between the 3rd and 2nd floors, everything went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting an eerie red glow. Aurora's breathing immediately became labored. Not now. Not here. Her inhaler was in her locker, 5 floors up. The familiar tightness in her chest began to constrict like a vice around her lungs. "Help!" she whispered, then louder. "Help!" The maintenance panel behind her opened with a metallic clang. A man in navy coveralls emerged from what she hadn't even realized was an access tunnel. Tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair and the kind of steady brown eyes that belonged in an operating room, not mopping floors. "Ma'am, you need to stay calm," he said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed completely at odds with his uniform. "You're having an asthma attack. I need you to lean forward, hands on your knees." Aurora wanted to tell him she was a doctor. She knew what was happening to her body, but she couldn't speak. The attack was severe, worse than she'd had in years. Her vision began to blur at the edges. "If you're finding this story as gripping as I hope you are, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps more people discover these stories. And if you want to hear how this incredible tale unfolds, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Your support means everything." The janitor, his name tag read D. Bennett, moved with impossible precision. From his tool belt, he produced what looked like a standard inhaler. But Aurora's medically trained eye caught something off. This wasn't a maintenance worker's inhaler. This was a prescription albuterol inhaler, and he was handling it like someone who understood exactly what he was doing. 2 puffs, he instructed, placing the inhaler in her hands. Deep breath in, hold for 10 seconds, then exhale slowly. Aurora followed his instructions, and within 30 seconds, her airways began to open. The crushing weight on her chest eased, but as her breathing normalized, her mind raced. How did a janitor know the precise protocol for severe asthma attacks? How did he have medical-grade medication in his tool belt? "Better?" he asked, and something about his voice made her look up sharply. There was something familiar about the cadence, the gentle authority, like an echo from a dream she couldn't quite remember. "You're not just maintenance," she said, studying his face in the red emergency lighting. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe fear. "I'm just a guy with asthma who knows the drill." But Aurora had spent enough years in medicine to recognize competence when she saw it. This man had assessed her condition, provided treatment, and monitored her response with the skill of someone who had medical training. Real medical training. The elevator jerked back to life, and normal lighting returned. As they descended to the parking level, Aurora got her first clear look at D. Bennett in regular light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of hands that seemed too refined for manual labor. And there was something else, a small scar above his left eyebrow that made her chest tighten with recognition she couldn't place. "Thank you," she said as the doors opened. "You probably saved my life. Just doing my job, Dr. Gray." She hadn't told him her name. Aurora turned back, but the elevator doors had already closed, carrying him back up into the bowels of the hospital. She stood alone in the parking garage, her medical mind churning. D. Bennett knew her name. He had prescription medication. He moved like a doctor, spoke like a doctor, and had the assessment skills of someone with years of medical training. So why was he mopping floors at 2 a.m.? Over the next 3 nights, Aurora found herself looking for him. She'd never paid attention to the overnight maintenance staff before, but now she was hyper-aware of every custodian, every face in Navy coveralls. On Thursday night, she finally spotted him in the cardiac wing, methodically cleaning the floors outside OR3 with an attention to detail that seemed almost obsessive. "Mr. Bennett," she called softly. He looked up, and again, that flicker of something in his eyes. Fear recognition. "Dr. Gray, working late again." "Always. Listen, I wanted to properly thank you for the other night. Maybe I could buy you coffee." Declan, she could see his first name on the name tag now, shook his head. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I was just glad to help." But Aurora wasn't easily deterred. She was a cardiac surgeon. Persistence was in her DNA. "It's Aurora, and it is necessary. You saved my life. The least I can do is buy you a cup of coffee." She watched him wrestle with the decision. Up close, she could see more details that didn't fit. His teeth were too straight and white for someone without good health care. His hands, despite the calluses he'd clearly developed from manual labor, had the fine motor precision of someone who'd once held scalpels. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, there was an intelligence there that seemed to pierce right through her. "One coffee," he said finally, "but not here. There's a diner 2 blocks down on Lexington. Mel's Diner, you know it." Aurora nodded. "I've been there a few times after particularly long surgeries. They're open all night. Meet you there in 20 minutes. As she watched him finish his cleaning with almost surgical precision, Aurora felt a strange sense of anticipation. She'd had coffee with colleagues, with medical students, with other doctors countless times. But this felt different. This felt like she was about to uncover something important. Mel's Diner at 3 a.m. was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly green, coffee that could strip paint, and a waitress named Dolores who'd clearly seen everything and judged nothing. Aurora slid into a booth near the back, still wearing her scrubs, and watched through the window as Declan approached. He'd changed out of his coveralls into jeans and a simple gray Henley that somehow made him look completely different. Less janitor, more, she couldn't put her finger on it, professional academic. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Aurora said as he sat down across from her. "Thank you for insisting." He flagged down Dolores. "2 coffees, please. And could we get some of those apple turnovers if you have them?" Aurora raised an eyebrow. "You're familiar with their menu. I come here sometimes. When I can't sleep. Insomnia. Something like that." Dolores brought their coffee, and Aurora studied Declan's face in the harsh diner lighting. The scar above his eyebrow was more pronounced here, and she found herself staring at it. "Car accident," he said, noticing her attention. "Long time ago." But something about the way he said it felt like a deflection. Aurora had heard enough patient histories to recognize when someone was editing their story. "So how long have you been working at Presbyterian?" she asked. "About 8 months. And before that, another pause. Another calculation behind his eyes. Different hospitals. Different cities. You move around a lot. Work follows work." Aurora sipped her coffee and tried a different approach. "Do you have family in the city?" And there, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I have a daughter, Hazel. She's 4. 4. Aurora's chest tightened. She'd always wanted children, but her career had consumed every available hour. That's a wonderful age. She is. Wonderful, I mean. Declan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of a little girl with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. She's the smartest kid I've ever met, always asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do people get sick? Why does Daddy have to work at night? Why do you work at night? The question slipped out before Aurora could stop herself. Declan's expression shuddered immediately. Better pay differential. Single parent, you know? Every dollar helps. But Aurora had caught something in his tone when he'd mentioned Hazel asking why people get sick. Most people didn't phrase medical questions that way. Most people said, "Why do people get hurt?" Or, "Why do people feel bad?" But "why do people get sick?" suggested someone who thought in medical terminology. "What does Hazel want to be when she grows up?" Aurora asked, deciding to stay on safer ground. "A doctor." Declan's smile returned. "She says she wants to help people feel better, just like—" He stopped abruptly. "Just like doctors do. She's very compassionate." But Aurora had heard the unfinished sentence. "Just like Daddy. Just like someone specific." She stored the information away and tried another angle. It must be difficult, working nights with a 4-year-old at home. "My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, helps out. Hazel stays with her when I'm working. It's not ideal, but—" He shrugged. "You do what you have to do." "Exactly." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, but Aurora's mind was churning. Single father, working nights, clearly intelligent, medical knowledge, and something about his whole demeanor that suggested he was playing a role rather than being himself. "Can I ask you something?" she said, finally. Declan tensed slightly. "Sure. The other night, you knew exactly how to handle my asthma attack. Most people would have panicked, maybe called 911. Definitely wouldn't have had the right medication just sitting in their tool belt. How did you know what to do? I told you. I have asthma myself. But you assessed my symptoms, determined the severity, provided exactly the right intervention, and monitored my response like you'd done it 100 times before. That's not personal experience. That's training." Declan's jaw tightened. "I've had a lot of asthma attacks. You learn. Have you ever worked in healthcare?" Why would you ask that? Aurora leaned forward. "Because every instinct I have as a physician is telling me that you've had medical training. The way you moved, the way you spoke, the way you handled the emergency. That wasn't luck or personal experience. That was professional competence." For a long moment, Declan said nothing. He stared into his coffee cup like it might hold answers to questions he didn't want asked. "I've been around hospitals a lot," he said finally. "You pick things up. As a patient, among other things." Aurora felt like she was pulling teeth. "What other things?" Declan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious relief. "I should go. Mrs. Chen needs me to pick up Hazel early. She has a doctor's appointment in the morning. Is everything okay?" The concern in Aurora's voice was automatic and genuine, just a routine checkup. But at 4, everything seems like a big deal. He stood up, pulling out his wallet, but Aurora waved him off. "I've got it. This was my idea. Remember, thank you. For the coffee and for—" He paused. "For what?" "For treating me like a person instead of just the guy who cleans your floors." And with that, he was gone, leaving Aurora sitting alone in the diner, with more questions than answers, and the strangest feeling that she'd just let something important slip through her fingers. The next evening, Aurora found herself actively seeking out Declan during her rounds. She told herself it was professional curiosity. She was a surgeon. She was trained to notice details that didn't fit. And everything about D. Bennett was a detail that didn't fit. She found him in the neurosurgery wing, which struck her as odd. Maintenance staff usually worked systematically through the hospital, but here was Declan, methodically cleaning outside the neurosurgical ORs with what looked like special attention to detail. Working the brain surgery wing tonight, she asked, approaching quietly. Declan startled, nearly dropping his mop. For someone who'd been so calm during her medical emergency, he seemed surprisingly jumpy. Dr. Gray, yes, just routine cleaning. But Aurora noticed his hands were shaking slightly, and there was something in his expression. Pain, maybe fear. She followed his gaze and realized he was staring at the instruments visible through the OR window. Specifically, he was staring at a craniotomy saw. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Declan jerked his attention away from the window. "Fine, just tired. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Long night." He resumed mopping, but his movements had lost their earlier precision. If anything, he seemed eager to move away from the neurosurgical suite. "Can I ask you something?" Aurora said, falling into step beside him as he headed toward the elevator. "You've been asking me things all week. Fair point. But this is different. Do you have problems with medical procedures? Some people do. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Even some medical professionals have specific triggers." Declan stopped walking. "Why would you say that?" "Because you just looked like you were going to be sick when you saw those surgical instruments. And the other night, you helped me with complete competence. But right now, you seem unsettled by the medical environment." "I'm not unsettled. You're gripping that mop handle like it's the only thing keeping you upright." Declan looked down at his hands, seeming surprised by his own tension. He consciously relaxed his grip, but the wariness in his eyes remained. "Some places just bring back memories," he said finally. "Bad memories. The worst." And there was something in the way he said it that made Aurora's chest tighten with sympathy. Whatever had happened to Declan Bennett, whatever had brought him to mopping floors at 2 a.m. while clearly being capable of much more, it was connected to hospitals, to medicine, possibly to surgery. "Do you want to talk about it?" she offered. Declan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't want to know?" "Actually, I do. I know we barely know each other, but I'm a good listener. Occupational hazard of being a doctor." For a moment, Aurora thought he might actually open up. His guard dropped just slightly, and she caught a glimpse of something raw and painful in his expression. But then his phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever moment they'd been having evaporated. "Hazel," he said, glancing at the screen. "She had a nightmare. I need to call her. Of course. Go." Aurora watched him walk away, noting how his entire demeanor changed the moment his daughter was involved. The tension melted away, replaced by focused concern and love. Whatever demons Declan was carrying, his daughter was clearly his anchor. But as she headed home that night, Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The pieces didn't fit. Declan's medical knowledge, his obvious intelligence, his reaction to surgical instruments, his careful deflection of personal questions, and the way he seemed to be hiding in plain sight. All of it pointed to someone with a history in medicine. Someone who'd left that world behind, possibly traumatically. Over the next few days, Aurora found herself thinking about Declan constantly. She'd catch herself looking for him during her rounds, and when she did spot him, she'd notice new details. The way he unconsciously checked his watch during shift changes, like he was used to precise scheduling. The way he cleaned around medical equipment with obvious familiarity. The way other staff members seemed to respect him despite his low position in the hospital hierarchy. And then there was the phone call she accidentally overheard on Friday night. She was leaving the cardiac wing around 1 a.m. when she heard Declan's voice coming from an empty patient room. The tone was urgent, professional, and completely different from the careful casualness he usually maintained around her. "Yes, I understand the risks, but the MRI results show clear progression. We can't wait much longer. I don't care about the complications. She needs the surgery. No, I can't bring her in officially, you know why. Look, just tell me what you really think." if it were your daughter. Aurora froze. Declan was talking about surgery for his daughter, but the way he was discussing medical terminology, risks, and MRI results sounded like he was consulting with another physician. As a colleague, not as a parent seeking a second opinion. She crept closer to the doorway, knowing she was eavesdropping but unable to stop herself. The septal defect is getting worse, and she's showing signs of heart failure. 4 years old, and her little body is already struggling. I know. But I also know what happens if we don't intervene soon. Aurora's blood ran cold. Septal defect. Heart failure. Declan's 4-year-old daughter had serious cardiac problems, and he was discussing them with medical precision that suggested extensive knowledge of pediatric cardiology. Meet me at the usual place tomorrow night, and bring the latest scans. I need to see them myself before we make any decisions. Yes, I'll have the money. I always have the money. The conversation ended, and Aurora quickly moved away from the doorway, her mind racing. Hazel had a heart defect. A serious one, if Declan was talking about signs of heart failure. And he was clearly consulting with someone off the books, paying cash, keeping everything unofficial. But why, if his daughter needed cardiac surgery, why not go through proper channels? Unless Declan couldn't go through proper channels. Unless there was something about his situation that prevented him from accessing normal medical care for his daughter. Aurora's phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Dr. Sarah Martinez. Coffee tomorrow. I need to vent about the new hospital policies. Aurora stared at the phone, an idea forming. Sarah worked in pediatric cardiology. If anyone would know the unofficial medical networks in the city, it would be Sarah. The next morning, Aurora met Sarah at their usual cafe near the hospital. After the requisite venting about administrative bureaucracy, Aurora carefully steered the conversation toward pediatric cardiac cases. Speaking of difficult cases, Aurora said casually, "Have you ever had parents who couldn't go through normal channels for their kids' surgery? Like people who needed to pay cash or keep things off the books?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. Why just wondering? I mean, there must be people who can't access regular health care for various reasons, right? Sure. Undocumented immigrants, people with serious financial issues, sometimes parents who are in legal trouble and don't want official medical records. Why, what about medical professionals who can't practice anymore? Like, if a doctor lost their license but still had connections in the medical community. Sarah set down her coffee and studied Aurora's face. Aurora, what's really going on here? Aurora hesitated. She was violating Declan's privacy by even having this conversation. But if his daughter's life was at stake? Hypothetically, she said, if a former physician needed pediatric cardiac surgery for their child, but couldn't go through official channels, what would they do? Hypothetically, they'd probably reach out to colleagues they trusted, arrange for off-the-books consultations, and try to set up surgery at a private clinic, or through a physician who was willing to bend the rules. It happens more often than you'd think. And if the child needed complex surgery, then they'd need someone really good. Someone willing to risk their own career to help. It's dangerous territory, Aurora, both medically and legally. Aurora nodded, filing away the information. Hypothetically speaking. But Sarah wasn't fooled. Aurora, if you know someone in this situation, you need to be very careful. These arrangements can go badly wrong, and if you get involved— I'm not involved in anything, Aurora said quickly. I was just curious about how the system works for people who fall through the cracks. But as she walked back to the hospital that afternoon, Aurora couldn't stop thinking about Hazel, a 4-year-old with heart failure, and a father who was clearly desperate enough to arrange illegal medical consultations while working night shifts as a janitor to pay for her care. And underneath it all, the growing certainty that Declan Bennett was much more than he appeared to be. The way he'd handled her medical emergency, his obvious knowledge of cardiac terminology, his reaction to surgical instruments, and now his off-the-books medical consultations for his daughter, all of it pointed to someone who'd once worked in medicine at a high level. Someone who'd lost everything. That night, Aurora found herself looking for Declan with new eyes. When she spotted him in the pediatric wing, carefully cleaning around the cardiac monitoring equipment, she noticed how his gaze lingered on the machines, not with the casual attention of a janitor, but with the focused assessment of someone who understood exactly what all those numbers and waveforms meant. "Declan," she called softly. He turned, and she saw the now familiar wariness in his expression. "Dr. Gray. Working late again, always." She approached slowly, like she was dealing with a skittish animal. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Is Hazel okay?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Aurora saw him go pale, saw his hands tighten on the mop handle, saw the careful mask he wore slip just enough to reveal the terror underneath. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I'm a cardiac surgeon, and I recognize the signs of a parent dealing with a child's serious heart condition. The way you look at the cardiac monitors, the way you tense up around medical equipment, the careful way you avoid talking about her health. You don't know what you're talking about." But his voice was shaking now, and Aurora could see the facade crumbling. "Declan, if Hazel has a cardiac condition, I might be able to help. I specialize in pediatric cases, and No." The word came out sharp and final. "You can't help. Nobody can help, not officially." "What does that mean?" Declan looked around the empty hallway, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It means that some people can't just walk into a hospital and demand the best cardiac surgeon. Some people have to find other ways to get their children the care they need. Why can't you just... Because I can't, okay? Because there are reasons, and complications, and a whole history that you don't understand." Aurora studied his face, seeing desperation and fear and something else, something that looked like guilt. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. And for a moment, just a moment, Declan's guard dropped completely. Aurora saw raw pain, devastating loss, and the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying an impossible burden alone. "I was a doctor once," he said quietly. "And I killed my wife." The words hung between them like a confession that could never be taken back. "You were a doctor," Aurora repeated slowly, her medical mind immediately cataloging everything she'd observed about Declan over the past week. What kind of doctor? Declan's laugh was bitter. The kind who should have saved his wife instead of killing her. "That's not how medicine works, and you know it." "Do I?" His voice cracked. "Because I was a neurosurgeon, Aurora, one of the best in the country. And when my pregnant wife came into my ER with a brain hemorrhage from a car accident, I made the choice to operate. I told myself I was the only one skilled enough, that I was her best chance. But really, I just couldn't let anyone else hold her life in their hands." Aurora felt the pieces clicking into place. The surgery didn't go well. The surgery was perfect. Textbook. I saved her brain, stopped the bleeding, everything by the book. But Charlotte had an undiagnosed clotting disorder. She threw an embolism on the table, and no amount of skill could bring her back. She died with my hands inside her skull. The pain in his voice was so raw that Aurora instinctively stepped closer. And Hazel emergency C-section. 28 weeks. She lived, but her heart... Declan's voice broke completely. The trauma from the accident, the premature birth, the stress of losing her mother. It all damaged her developing heart. Ventricular septal defect with increasing pulmonary hypertension. She needs surgery, but I can't give it to her. Why not? If you were a neurosurgeon, surely you have colleagues. I was sued into oblivion. Charlotte's family claimed I operated for emotional reasons instead of clinical ones, that I should have called in another surgeon. The medical board agreed. I lost my license, my career, everything. And now I'm a convicted medical malpractice case trying to get cardiac surgery for my daughter. No legitimate surgeon will touch her case. Aurora stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything made sense now. His medical knowledge, his reaction to surgical instruments, his careful avoidance of official medical channels. So you're paying someone under the table, Dr. Marcus Webb. He used to be my resident when I was at Mount Sinai. He's good, but he's not great. And what Hazel needs. Declan ran his hands through his hair. She needs someone like you. Someone with your skill level. But someone like you would never risk their career for someone like me. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Then she asked the question that had been nagging at her all week. Declan, 6 years ago, were you working at Presbyterian? What, 6 years ago, before you lost your license? Were you practicing here? Declan's face went white. Why are you asking me that? Because 6 years ago, I was in a bus accident. Severe head trauma. I spent 3 days in a coma, and when I woke up, I couldn't remember the accident, or the 2 years leading up to it. But I remembered a voice, a doctor's voice, talking me through the surgery, telling me I was going to be okay. Aurora, I've been looking for that doctor for 6 years. I wanted to thank him for saving my life. The voice in my memories, the one that kept me anchored when everything else was dark. She stepped closer, studying his face. It was your voice, wasn't it? Declan closed his eyes. You were the bus accident. Car 47 from the multi-vehicle pileup on the FDR drive. You remember me. I remember every patient I've ever lost, and every patient I've saved. He opened his eyes, and Aurora saw tears there. You were unconscious for most of it, but I talked to you anyway. Some surgeons work in silence, but I always talked. I told you about the procedure, about how well you were doing, about how you were going to wake up and have a full life ahead of you. You saved my life. Yes. And 3 hours later, you were operating on your wife. Declan nodded. Charlotte's accident happened while I was closing your surgery. I got the call in the OR. I should have let someone else take her case, but I couldn't. I scrubbed out of your surgery and went straight into hers. Aurora felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. So while I was recovering from brain surgery, your wife was dying from brain surgery. The irony wasn't lost on me. God, Declan. Aurora reached out instinctively, putting her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for me. I made my choices. But Hazel, his voice broke again. She's innocent in all of this. She's just a little girl who needs heart surgery. And I can't give it to her because I destroyed my own career trying to save her mother. Aurora's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Code Blue Pediatric Cardiac Unit. Dr. Gray to Pediatric Cardiac Unit. Stat. Both of them froze. That's not a coincidence, Aurora said, already running toward the elevator. What's your neighbor's number? The one watching Hazel. Declan was running beside her, his janitor's equipment abandoned in the hallway. Why, because I'm betting that Code Blue is for a 4-year-old girl with a septal defect. They reached the pediatric unit to find controlled chaos. Mrs. Chen, a small Asian woman in her 60s, was crying in the hallway, while paramedics transferred a small form onto a gurney. Hazel, Declan's voice broke as he saw his daughter, unconscious and gray, connected to multiple monitors. Sir, you can't, a nurse began, but Aurora cut her off. He's the father. What's her status? 4-year-old female, severe respiratory distress, signs of congestive heart failure. O2 sats dropped to 78% at home, unresponsive to oxygen. We need to get her to the cardiac unit now. Aurora looked at the monitors and felt her heart sink. Hazel's condition was critical. The septal defect had clearly worsened, and she was in full heart failure. Dr. Gray, Dr. Lincoln Watson appeared beside her. I need you to scrub in. This child needs immediate surgical intervention. Lincoln, I need to tell you something about this case. Tell me in the OR. We don't have time. But as they rushed Hazel toward the operating room, Aurora caught sight of Declan being held back by security. Sir, only family members can go past this point, and only in the waiting room. I am family. That's my daughter. Aurora made a split-second decision that would change everything. Let him through, she called. He's consulting on this case. Dr. Watson stopped. Consulting Aurora? What are you talking about? This man has extensive knowledge of this child's cardiac history. We need him. He's maintenance staff. Aurora looked directly at Declan, seeing the desperation and terror in his eyes. No, he's not. He's Dr. Declan Bennett, former neurosurgeon, and he understands this case better than anyone. The hallway went silent. Dr. Watson stared at Aurora like she'd lost her mind. Aurora, what the hell are you doing? I'm trying to save this child's life. Declan, scrub in. I need you to walk me through Hazel's complete cardiac history while we prep her for surgery. I can't. I don't have a license. You're not operating. You're consulting. There's a difference. 20 minutes later, Aurora stood in OR3 with Hazel's tiny body prepped for surgery. Declan stood beside her, wearing scrubs for the first time in years, his hands shaking as he looked at his daughter. Talk me through it, Aurora said softly. Everything I need to know. Ventricular septal defect, approximately 8 millimeters, with severe pulmonary hypertension. She's been in and out of heart failure for the past 6 months. The defect is getting larger, and her right ventricle is starting to fail from the increased pressure. Surgical approach patch closure via right ventriculotomy, but you'll need to be careful of the tricuspid valve. There's some regurgitation that suggests the valve apparatus might be involved. Aurora nodded, making the first incision. Keep talking. I need to understand her physiology. For the next 2 hours, Declan guided Aurora through the most complex pediatric cardiac surgery of her career. His knowledge of Hazel's condition was encyclopedic. Every detail of her medical history, every previous test result, every small change in her symptoms over the months. But more than that, Aurora could hear the love in his voice. This wasn't just medical knowledge. This was a father who had studied every aspect of his daughter's condition, who had memorized every heartbeat and every breath because he couldn't bear to lose her the way he'd lost her mother. The surgery was going perfectly until it wasn't. Aurora, Declan's voice was sharp with alarm. Her pressures are dropping. Aurora looked at the monitors and felt her stomach drop. Hazel was going into cardiogenic shock. The tiny heart was failing under the stress of the surgery. I need to put her on bypass, Aurora said. But even as she said it, she knew they were in trouble. Hazel's heart was too small, too damaged, and the shock was happening too fast. There's something else, Declan said quietly. Something I didn't tell you. What she has the same clotting disorder that killed her mother. Aurora's blood went cold. What it's genetic. I had her tested quietly. If she throws a clot during surgery, why didn't you tell me this before I started? Because you wouldn't have operated. And she would have died anyway. Aurora stared at the monitors, watching Hazel's pressure continue to drop. They were facing the same situation that had killed Charlotte, a patient with a hidden clotting disorder undergoing complex surgery. We need to get her off the table now, Aurora said. Close her up and hope we can stabilize her medically. No, Declan's voice was firm. She won't survive medical management. I've watched her declining for months. This surgery is her only chance. Declan, if she clots, then we deal with it. But we don't give up. Aurora looked at him across the operating table, seeing not the broken janitor she'd met a week ago, but the surgeon he used to be. The father who would risk everything for his daughter. Okay, she said. But I'm going to need your help. Not just as a consultant. I need you to operate with me. I can't. I don't have a license. I don't care about your license. I care about saving Hazel's life. Dr. Watson, who had been assisting in worried silence, finally spoke up. Aurora, if you let an unlicensed physician operate in my OR, then report me, Aurora snapped. But right now, this child is dying, and the man who knows her better than anyone is standing right here. Declan, scrub back in. We're going to finish this surgery together. What happened next was the most intense 4 hours of Aurora's career. Working together, she and Declan managed to complete the patch repair, but Hazel's condition remained critical. Her heart was struggling, and the clotting disorder meant that every minute on bypass increased the risk of a fatal embolism. We need to get her off bypass, Declan said, but her heart isn't strong enough to support circulation on its own. What do you recommend ECMO? External cardiac support until her heart recovers from the surgery. Aurora nodded, but as they prepared to transition Hazel to the ECMO machine, something went wrong with Aurora herself. The stress of the surgery, combined with her own medical history, triggered something she hadn't experienced in years. The operating room began to spin. Aurora felt her legs give out, and suddenly she was on the floor of the OR, convulsing. Aurora! Declan's voice seemed to come from far away. She's having a seizure! Get neuro down here now! But there wasn't time to wait for the neurology team. Aurora was seizing, and Hazel was still on bypass, still depending on Aurora to complete the surgery. Dr. Watson, Declan said, his voice taking on the authority he'd once wielded in operating rooms. Take over the bypass machine. Keep her stable. I'm not qualified. You're qualified enough. Just maintain the flow rates exactly as they are. Declan dropped to his knees beside Aurora, checking her airway, monitoring her breathing. The seizure was severe, worse than anything she'd experienced since her original brain injury 6 years ago. This is related to her head trauma, he said to the OR staff. She needs immediate neurological intervention, but I can't leave Hazel on bypass. Dr. Wyatt Hughes, Aurora's colleague from cardiology, had appeared in the OR during the commotion. Declan Bennett Wyatt. Declan looked up from where he was monitoring Aurora's seizure. I need help. Aurora is seizing. Hazel is on bypass, and I can't handle both. Jesus, what are you doing here? I heard you lost your license years ago. Long story. Right now, I need you to take over Aurora's surgery while I stabilize her. Wyatt stared at the scene. Aurora convulsing on the floor, Hazel on the operating table connected to the bypass machine, and Declan trying to manage both crises simultaneously. This is insane, Wyatt said, but he was already scrubbing in. What does the kid need? Completion of VSD repair and transition to ECMO. Aurora was just about to close when she went down, and Aurora neurological consultation, probably IV anticonvulsants, and monitoring for increased intracranial pressure. For the next hour, Declan performed a complex neurological assessment on Aurora, while simultaneously guiding Wyatt through the completion of Hazel's surgery. It was like watching a master conductor manage 2 orchestras at once, every decision precise, every instruction clear, every movement economical and purposeful. Finally, Aurora's seizure stopped, and Hazel was successfully transitioned to ECMO support. That, said Dr. Watson, pulling off his surgical mask, was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in an operating room. Aurora woke up 6 hours later in the ICU, disoriented and exhausted. The first thing she saw was Declan sitting beside her bed, still wearing scrubs, his face gray with exhaustion. "Hazel," she whispered. "Stable. On ECMO, but stable. The surgery was successful." "And you," Declan smiled sadly, "probably about to be arrested for practicing medicine without a license." But before Aurora could respond, Dr. Hughes entered the room with a man in an expensive suit. "Aurora, this is Richard Bennett," Wyatt said. "Declan's father." Aurora looked at the older man, seeing the family resemblance immediately. Same dark hair, same intelligent eyes, but with the polish and confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Dr. Gray," Richard Bennett said, "I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude for saving my granddaughter's life. Your son saved her life. And mine. Yes, he has a habit of doing that." Richard looked at Declan with obvious pride and regret. "Son, we need to talk." What Aurora learned over the next hour changed her understanding of everything. Richard Bennett wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful men in Texas, with connections that reached into every aspect of American healthcare. When Declan had lost his medical license, Richard had tried to use his influence to help, but Declan had refused, disappearing with infant Hazel rather than accept what he saw as undeserved assistance. "I've spent 5 years looking for you," Richard told Declan. 5 years, wondering if my granddaughter was healthy, if she was happy, if you were taking care of yourself. "I couldn't come back," Declan said. "Not after what happened to Charlotte. What happened to Charlotte was a tragedy, not malpractice. The appeal I've been working on for 5 years finally went through. Your medical license has been restored, son. You're officially Dr. Declan Bennett again." Aurora watched Declan's face cycle through disbelief, hope, and fear. "The legal team found new evidence," Richard continued. "Charlotte's clotting disorder was completely undiagnosed and undiagnosable with the testing available at the time. No surgeon, no matter how skilled, could have predicted or prevented what happened. The medical board has officially reversed their decision. But the lawsuit, settled and sealed. Charlotte's family has agreed to a public statement acknowledging that you provided appropriate care under impossible circumstances." Wyatt stepped forward. "Declan, there's more. Presbyterian has offered you the position of Chief of Neurosurgery. And Aurora, the hospital board wants to commend you for your actions today. They're calling it heroic medical intervention under emergency circumstances." Aurora looked at Declan, seeing tears in his eyes. "You're going to be okay?" "Both of you, are we?" Declan asked softly. "Because there's something else I need to tell you. What I'm in love with you, I have been since that first night in the elevator. Not because you needed saving, but because you're brilliant and compassionate, and you saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Aurora felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I love you too. I've been falling for you since the moment you talked me through that asthma attack with the competence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Even though I'm the reason you were in that bus accident." Aurora stared at him. "What are you talking about? 6 years ago, when I was operating on you, I got the call about Charlotte's accident. I should have finished your surgery before leaving, but I was so panicked about Charlotte that I handed your case off to another surgeon and ran. If I had stayed, if I had finished your surgery personally, you might not have had the complications that led to your memory loss. Declan, and then, because I left your surgery to operate on Charlotte, I was exhausted and emotionally compromised when I operated on her. Maybe if I had been fresh, if I had been thinking clearly, I could have anticipated the clotting disorder. I could have saved her." Aurora sat up in bed despite the IV lines, reaching for his hands. "Listen to me. You saved my life. The complications I had were from the original trauma, not from the surgery. And Charlotte's clotting disorder was undiagnosable. You couldn't have known. But nothing. You're a brilliant surgeon who was dealt an impossible situation. You saved me. You tried to save Charlotte, and now you've saved Hazel. You don't get to carry guilt for things that were beyond your control. Declan looked at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. Besides, Aurora continued, if you hadn't left my surgery to operate on Charlotte, we never would have met again. I never would have found my mystery surgeon, and Hazel never would have gotten the cardiac care she needed. So what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. Maybe we were meant to find each other again, under different circumstances, so we could both heal. 6 months later, Aurora stood in the Presbyterian Hospital chapel, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of white roses. Hazel, now healthy and vibrant at 5 years old, stood beside her in a pale pink dress, carefully holding the rings. Ready? Declan asked, looking impossibly handsome in his black suit. I've been ready for 6 years, Aurora replied. I just didn't know I was waiting for you. The ceremony was small, just family, close friends, and the medical staff who had become family over the months of Hazel's recovery. Richard Bennett walked Aurora down the aisle, having stepped in when she mentioned that her own father couldn't make it from Seattle. I'm gaining a daughter and getting my son back, he had said. It's the least I can do. As they exchanged vows, Aurora looked at Declan and saw not the broken janitor she'd met in an elevator, but the brilliant surgeon, devoted father, and loving partner he'd always been underneath the pain. You saved my life twice, she whispered during the ring exchange. Once on an operating table 6 years ago, and once in an elevator 6 months ago. You saved mine too, Declan replied. You gave me back my purpose, my family, and my future. Dr. Hughes, who had officiated the ceremony as a newly ordained minister, a fact that had surprised everyone, pronounced them husband and wife to enthusiastic applause. Later, at the reception in the hospital cafeteria, Aurora's idea, since that was where their relationship had really begun, Hazel gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. My daddy used to be very sad, she said, standing on a chair so everyone could see her. But then Aurora came, and now he smiles all the time. And now I have a mommy who can fix hearts just like Daddy fixes brains. We're going to help lots of people together. Aurora looked around the room at the faces of people who had become family. Dr. Hughes, who had revealed himself to be Declan's oldest friend and had been protecting him from behind the scenes for years. Dr. Watson, who had become a mentor and advocate. Richard Bennett, who had never stopped believing in his son. Mrs. Chen, who had become Hazel's honorary grandmother, and dozens of colleagues who had supported them through the most difficult period of their lives. What are you thinking? Declan asked, following her gaze. I'm thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. If you hadn't lost your license, if Hazel hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't had that asthma attack, we might never have found each other again. Exactly. Declan pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor, and as they swayed to music playing from someone's phone, Aurora thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The bus accident that had cost her 2 years of memories, but had put her in Declan's path. The malpractice case that had nearly destroyed him, but had also made him the kind of person who could love so deeply. The years of struggle that had brought them both to that elevator, at that moment, when they were finally ready to save each other. So what's next for Dr. and Dr. Bennett? Aurora asked as the song ended. Well, Chief of Neurosurgery Bennett and Chief of Pediatric Cardiology. Bennett, Declan said, spinning her around, are going to revolutionize pediatric neurological cardiac care. Is that a thing? It is now. We're going to create the first integrated program for children who need both cardiac and neurological intervention. No child will ever fall through the cracks, the way Hazel almost did. Aurora kissed him, tasting happiness and hope, and the promise of a future built on love and shared purpose. "I love you, Dr. Bennett. I love you too, Dr. Bennett." And as Hazel ran over to join their dance, her laughter filling the room, Aurora knew that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that began with saving each other's lives and ended with building a life together that would save countless others. The janitor who had whispered, "She can't breathe," had indeed changed her life in 3 seconds. But it had taken 6 years, 2 broken hearts, 1 little girl, and a lifetime of love to understand that those 3 seconds were just the beginning of their real story. And as Hazel ran over to join their dance, her laughter filling the room, Aurora knew that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that began with saving each other's lives and ended with building a life together that would save countless others. The janitor who had whispered, "She can't breathe," had indeed changed her life in 3 seconds. But it had taken 6 years, 2 broken hearts, 1 little girl, and a lifetime of love to understand that those 3 seconds were just the beginning of their real story. 5 years later, Dr. Aurora Bennett stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Bennett Center for Integrated Pediatric Care, watching her husband perform a delicate neurological procedure on a 7-year-old boy who would need cardiac surgery the following week. The seamless coordination between neurosurgery and cardiology that they had pioneered was now the gold standard, copied by hospitals across the country. "Mommy, look what I drew." Hazel, now 10 and healthy, bounded into the observation room with a sketch pad. The drawing showed a family of 3 stick figures in white coats, standing around a hospital bed with a smiling patient. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Aurora said, pulling Hazel close. "Is that for your school project about heroes?" "Uh-huh. I'm writing about how real heroes are people who save other people, even when it's really hard and scary." Hazel paused, studying her parents through the observation window. "Mrs. Martinez says most kids write about superheroes, but I think you and Daddy are better than superheroes." Aurora felt tears prick her eyes. "Why's that?" "Because superheroes have magic powers. But you and Daddy just have love and really smart brains, and you still save everybody." Through the intercom, they could hear Declan's voice as he worked, calm and reassuring. "You're doing great, buddy. We're almost finished, and then you're going to feel so much better." It was the same voice that had guided Aurora through her darkest moments 6 years ago. The voice that had talked her through brain surgery when she was unconscious. The voice that had whispered comfort to a dying wife and promises to a newborn daughter. Now, it was the voice that had saved hundreds of children. The voice that told bedtime stories to Hazel every night. And the voice that still whispered, "I love you" to Aurora every morning. "Dr. Bennett." A young resident approached them. "The family in room 304 is asking to speak with you. Their daughter is the same age as yours was when she had her surgery, and they're..." "Scared?" Aurora nodded, understanding immediately. Over the years, they had become more than surgeons. They had become symbols of hope for families facing impossible medical situations. Parents who felt lost in the maze of pediatric healthcare found comfort in knowing that the doctors treating their children had walked the same terrifying path. "Tell them I'll be right there," Aurora said. She kissed Hazel's forehead. "Stay here with Grandpa Richard, okay? Mommy needs to go help some worried parents." As Aurora walked toward room 304, she reflected on how their story had rippled outward, touching lives in ways they never could have imagined. The Bennett Center had treated over 3,000 children in 5 years. Their research had led to breakthrough treatments for complex pediatric cases. Medical students came from around the world to study their integrated approach. But perhaps most importantly, they had shown that sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones doing the saving. that love could transform tragedy into purpose, and that the most profound healing often happened not in the operating room, but in the courage to trust someone with your heart. The janitor and the doctor had found each other in the dark. Now they spent their days bringing light to others.